Live from Juneau, KTO Public Media presents special Gavel, Alaska coverage of Senator Lisa Murkowski's annual address to the Alaska Legislature. I'm Jeremy Shea. Senator Murkowski will be headed into the chambers of the Alaska House of Representatives shortly to deliver her annual speech. The legislature's had a tradition of inviting the congressional delegation in to deliver an address while they're in session. Senators and representatives are jointly convened this morning to hear from Senator Murkowski. Murkowski plans to take a few questions from state lawmakers from the podium. Alaska's junior senator, Dan Sullivan, is set to deliver his address at 11 a.m. Thursday. And there's one more special address this week. We'll be broadcasting Chief Justice Joel Bolger's State of the Judiciary address. That's at 11 a.m. tomorrow. Reporter Liz Ruskin covers Senator Murkowski as Alaska Public Media's correspondent in Washington, D.C. We talked yesterday about Murkowski's evolving role in the Senate.
Of course, she gets a lot of national attention in part because she's one of the few moderates left. You know, one of the few Republicans who might be able to criticize the president. She's often asked if she will play that role. A number of senators left who might have played that role before, Senator Flake, Senator Corker. So, you know, it's dwindling numbers of Republicans who get called on to say, what do you think of this thing that the president just did? And so she gets a lot of attention that way. And her other reason to be in the spotlight often is because she's chairman of the Senate Energy Committee, which is a pretty powerful purge. She's in her final 2 years in that position. The Republicans have term limits on the chairmanships, and hers expires at the end of this Congress. So at the end of 2020 is the end of her chairmanship. So, you know, there is some question about whether she would run for re-election when she's next up in 2022. She's rising in seniority in the appropriation.
And you can see Senator Gary Stevens and Representative Bart LeBon just escorted Senator Murkowski into chambers.
I forget. It's right down here. Madam President. Mr. Speaker. Old habits, huh? Wow. That's a little bit presumptuous. Believe me, I'm not here to start any coups. Madam President, Mr. Speaker, it is truly good to be with you, members of the House, members of the Senate. Thank you for the opportunity to be back for my 16th annual address before the legislature. It's always an honor. It really is a privilege to be back, to be with friends, and to be with those who are truly making things happen for our state, around the state. In these chambers, we see Alaskans coming together. Sometimes it takes a little bit of time to come together, but Alaskans that come together generation after generation. You're charting a path to a better, a stronger, and a more prosperous future. I think about kind of this progression of career and life when I come back to Juneau, because when I was a young freshman working with friends like Gary Stevens in the House, and Gary, who else is left over? Wow, like Gary Stevens in the House. But that was a time when my husband was running the pasta company as a small businessman. Our boys were young pages, not the likes of some of these good, tall young people that we have, but the boys were little. Now our youngest son is running Vern's business. He's taken over the family business. And our older son is going to be graduating from law school in May. So things move on. Things move on. So that's my family update. I know that oftentimes this part of the speech is the longest part of the speech, but I'm gonna try to keep my comments shorter than usual this year. You know I like the question and answer part as much as anything, so we'll look forward to that. But we've been talking a lot about families recently, and not only a lot about families, but a lot with families. During the partial government shutdown, I spent a lot of time meeting with and holding calls with federal employees all over the state. Love the conversations, the very direct conversation with the spouses of the Coast Guard, for instance, but speaking with Alaskans who were impacted by this shutdown. And you saw it play out in the media. The media was very focused on the actual number of federal workers who were furloughed or who were working without pay. But the effects of that shutdown were much, much broader. And we were involved in ways that perhaps didn't make the papers. In fact, the goal was to not make the papers. But the Yukon Quest, the sled dog race up north, was threatened until we were able to secure USDA approval for some supplies that they needed for the race. But we were able to figure out a way to keep the race going. Captains of crabbers and trawlers were worried about whether they could actually go out fishing or whether they were going to be stuck in port while we pushed for inspections that they needed. We worked with Senator Keel to ensure that the school in Gustavus there was able to receive safe drinking water. And yet for every hurdle that we were able to navigate to help overcome, there was a small business out there that couldn't get their loans processed, that were held up. There was a project that was left waiting for permits, local restaurants that would struggle to make up for the lost business. You just don't get that back. And that shutdown was really a reminder of the role, or certainly a reminder to me of the role that the federal government plays in our state and across our communities. And it's in a way, it's a little like the recent earthquake that we felt in South Central, and that still rattles us. It hit again yesterday morning when I was home. But it's a reminder that Alaskans come together. We rise to the occasion. We do that, and we do it well. We saw our credit unions here in the state and our banks step up to help families bridge the gaps. We saw our air traffic controllers and TSA agents that kept the skies safe. They kept the airplanes flying. Our Coast Guard families. The Coast Guard families, you know, they're in high-cost places like Kodiak and Cordova, Ketchikan, Sitka, Petersburg, here in Juneau. But they told me very directly that they felt thankful that they were stationed in our small coastal communities because they really felt the love from those communities, that these communities came out and supported them, whether it was spaghetti feeds or what was put together through literally pop-up food banks. So whether you are Coast Guard, a federal agency employee, or a contractor, just thank you. Thank you for your service. Thank you for holding on during a difficult time during this shutdown. Just thank you for what you do. Now, we were able to avert a shutdown, a second one, this past week. I am in the camp that says no shutdown is good, and I'm working with my colleagues to prevent this from ever happening again. I think shutdowns are just not a good way to govern, just not a good way to govern. So it's been kind of a frustrating start to the year, and I think I'm probably in good company here when I'm saying it's been a frustrating start to the year. But despite the frustration in Washington, we have seen some genuine successes for our state this year that are worthy of mention, and I want to share just some of these briefly. We all care about the health of our communities and those within our communities. We passed major opioid legislation that assists community-driven solution, like we have out in the Mat-Su with our Mat-Su Opioids Task Force and their goal to support opioid withdrawal management. We provide tools to address the opioid treatment workforce shortage here in the state, to expand treatment for substance use disorder programs, to increase the use of telehealth programs across the state, help to stop the flow of opioids and fentanyl that comes in through the mail. So significant measures in that direction. When it comes to our military and those who defend us every day, we supported our troops through the biggest pay raise in nearly 10 years. For our veterans, we passed significant legislation to provide them with greater access to health care closer to home. We passed legislation to modernize our airports and enhance aviation safety. We made significant investments in the WRDA bill in safe drinking water improvements and advancements to facilitate hydropower. So that helps us down here in Southeast, benefits Swan Lake and Mahoney Lake, but also up in Kodiak with Terror Lake. For our fishermen, our delegation worked together to secure a permanent exemption for our fishing fleet from unnecessary discharge regulation. This is something that we've been working on for years, and those of you from fishing communities know how frustrating it has been when your fisherman is worried about a potential fine from the EPA for literally hosing off the decks and seeing that run off. So a big shout out to Senator Sullivan for his leadership on the Coast Guard reauthorization bill, which helped to finally resolve this issue. And through my role on the Appropriations Committee, we've been able to steer NOAA's budget in a manner that really does work to support our Alaskan fisheries. It sustains the scientific work that's needed to manage our resources properly with maximum input from Alaskans. We've made sure that legislative efforts to establish a federal permitting framework for aquaculture protects states' ability to have a say in what is happening just off of our shore. This is an important one, again, for those coastal communities. Aquaculture, from a national perspective, is viewed through one lens. We here in Alaska perhaps have a different focus on that. Then, just this past Thursday, we passed omnibus legislation to fund agencies, including NOAA, including the Department of Interior, USDA, Transportation, and we've done it now for the rest of the fiscal year. We included full funding for PILT and funds to tackle water and wastewater infrastructure, the housing crisis in rural Alaska, wildfire suppression and hazardous fuels mitigation, rural broadband, and other critical programs. So these are things where you say, well, you shouldn't get thank yous or congratulations for finally doing your work. We needed to finally get this done. So getting that off of our plates so we can move to this next fiscal year has been critically important to get around that shutdown, around that budget impasse. Included within that omnibus, though, I think it's important to touch on some of the things that might hit a little bit closer to home. We were able to add $9 million for build grants. This is an infrastructure program that just recently provided funding for the Nenana-Tochaket Bridge that we worked on with Senator Coghill to secure. This project, this development, is going to open up access to some 900,000 acres of agricultural, university, and state forest lands. But it's made available through investments that we have made through things like the build grants. Increasing access to Alaska's lands, to our waters, for responsible development takes work every single day back in Washington, D.C. It is a concerted effort by your delegation, and you just really cannot miss a day pressing these issues. But we have seen some real results up north in our push to open new acreage in the National Petroleum Reserve and within the coastal plain. And experts are paying attention to this. They're seeing what's going on. IHS Markit, I'm not sure if you're familiar with it down here. It's a premier energy consultant in the lower 48. They recently upgraded the North Slope to a super basin with production projected to grow by 40% over the next 8 years. That's pretty significant. Just a few weeks ago, the Energy Information Administration reported that it now expects Alaska production to be 90% higher from 2031 to 2050, and that's compared to last year's base forecast. So others are looking at us. Others are looking at us with great interest and great anticipation. So after years of concern about our Trans-Alaska Pipeline, I think we're turning a corner. And producing oil here in Alaska for as long as our nation and the world demand it will create jobs here, it'll generate revenues, and it will give us time to diversify our economy. Now, another area where we're working towards greater access is right here in the Tongass National Forest. Last year, the Department of Agriculture and the Forest Service initiated this state-specific roadless rule. We're pushing hard for a full exemption on this. This is important because this is our best chance to secure new opportunities for Southeast communities to grow and prosper. And this is whether it's for timber, whether it is for renewable energy, whether it's mining or tourism. Really, in our state, it's about access. Access is key, just as it is on our public lands at the federal level. Last week, the Senate passed my bipartisan lands package. What we did with this bill, we bundled together. I gotta tell you about it first before you applaud. But we took 120, I think it's 124 actually, different lands, water, conservation, and sportsman's bill. Put them all together in a package. This is something that we've been working on for at least 5 years since we've had a major lands package. But some of these initiatives have been in the works for well over 5 years, 10 years, some of them even longer. But it's a reflection of what we call in Washington regular order, where you introduce a bill. You have it heard before a committee. You debate it in committee. You amend it. You take it before the floor. You debate it. You move it through the other body. You debate it. It comes out the other end. It would be nice to get it signed into law, right? Sometimes that doesn't happen. And particularly with some of these more discrete parochial measures. It doesn't command the floor time. And so they sit usually in a corner until you can package up enough to advance them across the floor. But what we were able to do was not only move through regular order, but we were able to work every step of the way to gain that strong bipartisan support. And it shows that when you reach for bipartisanship, you really can achieve overwhelming success. It might not come overnight, but it is worth the effort. Now, as you might expect, this lands package happens to have a few Alaskan priorities. We made sure that was included. We provide routing flexibility for our proposed natural gas pipeline. We create new economic opportunities for Cake down here in Southeast and Utqiagvik up north. It includes a provision from Senator Sullivan that will finally uphold the promises made to Alaska natives who served during the Vietnam War and who were not able to take the benefit of the land allotments that were owed to them by the federal government. So we've finally been able to resolve that as well. The bill prioritizes access to public lands for hunting and fishing with a policy that clearly states that federal land is open unless closed. It seems pretty much common sense. These are federal lands. These are public lands. These are lands that are available to us for our enjoyment, hunting and fishing, taking your kids out. And so to have a policy that says come on, use it, enjoy the benefits of our land. Having a policy that says it's open unless specifically closed is important. We also have significant conservation measures contained within this package. We permanently reauthorize the Land and Water Conservation Fund with some reforms that strengthen the stateside program. This is going to benefit Alaska State Parks, so that helps you all out. The final vote on this package, the final vote in the Senate, was 92-8. That's a pretty good number to get to, ladies and gentlemen. It's now over in the House, where it's in good hands with the Dean of the House, Congressman Young. He's been taking care of business over there for Alaska on his side of the Capitol for more than 40 years running. So he tells me he's got this covered, Lisa, so we're making it happen. As the chairman of the Energy and Natural Resources Committee, I'm also pushing to keep regulatory approval for our gas line project on track. And this means filling the vacancies on the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission and ensuring that there is sufficient personnel. You have to have the bodies in place to process an application that is as massive as what has been presented. We're coordinating with the Department of Energy, with FERC, and others to protect our nation's cybersecurity, because we know that infrastructure is vulnerable and that everyone, I don't care how remote you are. We've seen it with our rail belt utilities. High value targets, and so making sure that we've got our eye on that with a focus on cybersecurity is key. Another top priority is updating and modernizing our energy policies to promote innovation. And this is where I can get really excited, talking fast about what is going on in Alaska. After years of good hard work, careful cultivation, and immense effort, the Department of Energy and the private sector, they're looking to us. They're looking to Alaska as the place for innovation. And this is whether it's in microgrids or renewables, advanced nuclear, other technologies. Just last month, we made significant progress on potentially historic methane hydrate test well up on the North Slope for what we hope is going to be a groundbreaking demonstration. We've got methane hydrates in almost unfathomable quantities. It's just huge. It's massive up there. And so our collaborative approach on this could really take us to innovative levels of innovation. We all know that too many Alaskans, especially in our rural communities, continue to pay some of the highest prices for energy in the country. And many of these rural communities are the ones that are on the front lines when it comes to climate change. And so innovation is going to be, it must be, a major factor in addressing both of these challenges. And this is where the federal partnerships really matter. That's how Stebbins and St. Michael's are acquiring a new wind turbine, how Newtok is acquiring a heat recovery system, how the Unalakleet Native Corporation will upgrade their transmission lines and wind diesel microgrid, how Nushagak is developing plans for a regional hydro project, how St. Mary's and the Alaska Village Electric Co-op, AVAC, and its partners are teaming to install a 900-kilowatt wind turbine in Intertie to Mountain Village. So these are projects. I know we're sitting here in Juneau a long ways away from where these places are, and the communities are not large communities. But think about the difference that they're going to make for those people out there. The cost of electricity was 80 cents a kilowatt hour in Newtok last year before PCE. In St. Mary's, it's 50 cents a kilowatt hour. And in Mountain Village, heating oil, nearly $7 a gallon, twice what the average American has to pay. So these projects mean not only cleaner energy, but more affordable energy. The innovation that we're seeing up north and around our communities is drawing attention to the north. And as more agencies are seeing what's happening in Alaska, it's bolstering our efforts in the Arctic. It's been a long journey. You've heard me before over the years as I've addressed you, talking about my frustration that others are not as engaged in Arctic issues as we clearly are. It's been a long journey, but we are finally seeing greater support for our efforts to ensure that the U.S. fulfills its role as an Arctic nation, and we assert our national interests in the region. We know that we've got a long ways to go. We'll be the first to admit it. But I want to thank you. I want to thank our legislature and all that you have done with us to advocate. I would ask that you continue to push this issue with me. I mentioned the omnibus spending bill a little bit ago, but this omnibus bill provides funding, $655 million to be exact, to fully construct the first polar security cutter. This is code for an icebreaker. We've talked about the need to have an ice-breaking fleet. Right now, we don't have a fleet. I've often said, when you just have one, it does not a fleet make. Well, with this appropriation that is now law, we are, again, fully funding the first icebreaker with funding towards the second. So we are in line to, again, engage in a way that will have a presence. The Department of Defense has really stepped up to the plate on all issues surrounding the Arctic. And it has been a good partnership here. I'm very, very eager to work with them. But I think we all recognize that there's more to the Arctic than just the national defense piece of it. We can't forget about the people of the Arctic. We can't forget about the people who live there. Late last year, we introduced several bills to reinvigorate America's approach to the Arctic, bringing indigenous voices to Arctic policy, and also to counterbalance Russia's increasing dominance over Arctic shipping. So we, in our legislation, codify the Arctic Executive Steering Committee to ensure the resources, and most importantly and notably, the personnel, are devoted to a working Arctic policy for our nation. So I kind of wrap up my remarks here by coming back to the people that make this all happen. It was back in the Reagan administration where they kind of had this mantra that said personnel is policy. And when you think about that, think about it in the context of some of the things that we're working on. Opening the 1002 area was not just about passing a bill. It's now about the efforts of qualified and competent personnel to process permits and reflect what Alaskans expect from responsible resource development projects. When you address the issues before you, of crime, tackling crime and public safety crisis that we see across all parts of our state, in rural and in urban areas. It's going to take experienced public safety professionals at all levels to find and implement and deliver the solutions that are necessary, that our constituents expect. So let's not forget about those who make our policies happen. And as we remember the importance of personnel to policy, I want to acknowledge a few of my staff that are with me in Juneau today. I've got Garrett Boyles, who's a tall guy in the back there. He grew up in some of our smaller coastal communities, Uzinki, Seward. He is back in Washington, D.C. as my legislative director. John Crowther, who's at the end there, he's from Anchorage originally. He was formerly with the governor's office in Washington, D.C., and the Department of Natural Resources here in the state, so many of you know him. He's joined my energy team as counsel for oil and gas policy, so all things oil and gas, go see John. Annie Heffler is sitting next to John. Annie's also from Anchorage, but she played a very, very significant role in our lands package. She's on my energy committee staff. And then Ann Robertson is next to Garrett there. Ann, local girl, from Juneau here, and she's my fish gal. She is my fish expert on everything. that relates to our fisheries, maritime, ocean advisor, and has done a great job. She came to us from the Sea Grant program, which I have learned is extraordinarily beneficial, and we're reaping those benefits. And then next to Ann, we have Dana Herndon. And Dana is the newest member to my team. She is our Juneau delegation representative. She works for both myself and Senator Sullivan. So you'll probably be seeing her on Thursday when Dan comes to speak to you. Many of you know and have a very fond spot in your heart for Connie McKenzie, as I certainly do. Connie worked for the delegation for years, and she retired. I saw her last night, and she's actually retiring. So she was telling me she was going skiing yesterday, and she's probably not listening to my speech. So that's what retirement really is all about. But I'm proud of them. I'm proud of all our staff, all my staff does, and all your staff does, to help all of us. I threw a little reception last evening, invited all of the legislative staff, and I had one of these, well, wait a minute, what about the legislators? And I said, I get to see the legislators. But I know that so much of what we are able to do, to be armed with information, to be working through some of these difficulties, we just don't have enough hours in the day. We rely on these men and women, many who leave their families in other parts to come down here and be part of your team. So they too deserve that thanks and that recognition. So now they're going to ask you all, when are you going to throw a reception for them? But I'll help you out with that. But these are the things that we do. And you know the smaller things that mean so much to families and businesses in your district. So whether we're working at our level and resolving things with Social Security or Medicare or Medicaid, immigration, pushing agencies to be more timely with their decisions, prioritizing permits, or just working with the Postal Service to make sure that they're getting the bypass mail out. What we do, our successes, really reflect the efforts of Alaskans. I'm reminded of a gentleman that I've gotten to know over the years, Martin B. Moore. Martin B. Moore Sr. from Imonic. Some of you know Martin. But Martin has been dogged. He's been tireless on working to get a build grant for the Lower Yukon Regional Port Project out in Imonic. And he got word not too many weeks ago that he had been successful. And Martin's kind of response was, well, yeah, I should have gotten that. I've been working so hard. But it's a reminder that you've got a vision here for your region, for your community, that will bring really lasting economic impact and benefit. Provide jobs. In his case, reducing transportation costs. And I think about that as the example. It's not going to make the front page of the Washington Post. It's not going to probably make the front page of the Juneau Empire. But we're making a difference out in these communities. Our challenges are great, but our opportunities are endless. And really, it's the people. It's the people of this state that are our greatest resource. So I'm so honored to work with you. I'm so willing, able, and desiring to support you in your efforts. As all of us, as Alaskans, we break down barriers to access and chart new pathways for our future and ensure a safer and a stronger Alaska for all of us and our families. So thank you for the good work that you do. And I probably went longer than I had anticipated. But, Madam President, Mr. Speaker, thank you. Thank you.
Senator Murkowski has agreed to take some questions. So if anyone has any questions. Excuse me. I believe Representative Rasmussen had her hand up.
Thank you for being here today, Senator. I just wanted to ask, as Alaska faces some of the lowest scores in reading across the state, I'm just curious if there's anything being looked at the federal level for some help with maybe pre-K or something we can do to improve the educational outcomes here in Alaska?
Well, you're looking at someone that is very focused at the early end of education. It's not that we should not emphasize secondary education, graduate education, but we all know that the earlier we can reach our kids, the more that we can provide to them in early childhood education, the better off that we can be. So making sure that whether it is Head Start funding, whether it is funding for early childhood education, there are opportunities at the federal level that we have been working to advance. I have been, in my position on the HELP committee, the Health, Education, Labor, Pensions, this is something that we spend a lot of time with. It is obviously, you all are going to be dealing with some challenges with the budget here. Those are going to be difficult because the impact is something that needs to be considered. And as we look to address the budgetary issues and find that trade-off, let's make sure that we're not limiting, again, our greatest potential, which is the growth and development of young Alaskans. We'll work with you on education issues.
Representative Hopkins.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Senator Murkowski, for coming and talking to us and for the work you do every day for all of us here in Alaska. I also wanted to thank you for your renewed support or invigorated support of the Equal Rights Amendment, the ERA, and wanted to ask you how that's shaping up in Washington and what we can do here in Alaska, in our communities, and in the legislature to help support your work on that as well.
Well, it's interesting. I introduced that measure a little less than a month ago with a senator from Maryland, and when he came to me and asked me if I was interested in partnering with him on this, my response was, gosh, you mean we still haven't got the Equal Rights Amendment ratified yet? And so it caused me to go back to, well, wait a minute, what did we do here in Alaska? The Equal Rights Amendment moved through Congress it was March of 1972. By April of that same year, Alaska had already passed that. We didn't wait a full month to say, what's wrong with this picture? Why wouldn't we want to ensure that women are afforded that same level of protection that we provide for those based on race, ethnicity? So I have introduced this. I think it's important to recognize, though, exactly what it is that we have introduced. When the Equal Rights Amendment was first moved through Congress, it included an expiration date. It basically said 7 years for the 38 states. 38 states is required for ratification to find 38 states to pass. And it is one of just a few constitutional amendments that actually had a time deadline with it. So we have extended that deadline once, and it's just been kind of allowed to lapse. So we're very close to getting the 38 states. We're at 37 now. Virginia just took the effort up, and it didn't advance. Arizona is moving on it. But it is something that we want to make sure that there is when the 38th state actually does pass it, that there isn't an impediment that is viewed or perhaps challenged because of the initial legislation that said there was a time frame. So what we do is we remove the 7-year timeline. So Alaska, you're done. You've checked that box. We're in good shape here, and I thank you for that, even though some of you were probably not even born when we passed that.
Representative Ortiz.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Senator Murkowski, for being with us here today. Thank you for your comments that you made earlier in relationship to renewable energies, in relationship to the Tongass. Appreciate those. And Senator, we all know that you are a big supporter of our fishing industry and the need to do what we can to enhance and protect that industry because it plays such a valuable role in our state's economy. And with that in mind, can you give us an update on where things stand in relationship to the transboundary mining issue and the U.S. State Department and the Government of Canada?
This is something that I think we're making some headway on different levels. From the appropriations perspective, we were able to include additional money for more water monitoring gauges, so we'll now be out in the Unic River area as well. So that's an important part of what it is that we do. The ongoing discussions between Alaska and Canada, I think, have been important. You know, we've got a new team in place here. We need to make sure that with the new administration here in Juneau, that they are continuing to work those efforts. There is I think there has been a little bit of progress within State Department, but in fairness, this has not been an issue that they have assigned a level of priority to that I think satisfies us here. As you know, we've been continuing to push on that, whether it is moving this to an IJC process, but being able to highlight that and elevate that is where we're going to make a difference. There was recently an opinion that came out of the Canadian Supreme Court, and I apologize, I don't know how long it's been out there, but it is interesting because it basically said that energy projects have a requirement or a heightened requirement to make sure that that there will be a process to deal with, whether it is remediation, but it's probably a little bit of a hook or an angle to elevate that conversation for what can be done on the Canadian side to ensure that there are greater financial assurances that are put in place. So there's a host of different levels that we're working at. Everything that you can do in the legislature from the perspective of keeping this on the front burner in terms of issues and priorities, whether it's resolutions, all of that helps with every new Congress because it reaffirms the message and the priority. So let's keep working on that.
Senator Olson.
Thank you, Senator Murkowski, for coming back. Thank you for highlighting the opportunities that are up on the North Slope. I am the senator from that area, and especially for highlighting the people that are up there and live up there. One of the things that I've got recently was a phone call from a resident of the North Slope Borough who stated there's an all-out assault on what's going on up there related to the North Slope Borough, and that has to do with Senate Bill 57, which is the petroleum property tax repeal efforts that are going on out there. I'd just like to know what your thoughts and ideas are on that, since you're very familiar with that area and very familiar with the people that are up there as well. Please.
Well, these are clearly going to be part of the very difficult decisions and discussions that you all will have, but I will tell you that just, first blush, the proposal is concerning to me. As you know, we've got extraordinary opportunities for resource development across our state right now. And what we're seeing within the North Slope and the oil and gas fields, as I mentioned in my remarks, it just seems that they continue to get better. The opportunities that we have, the significant developments in exploration and the investment that comes. So I know that you're going to have some interesting conversations about these, but I would discourage anything that creates division among Alaskans over the value of our natural resources. Again, I appreciate the state's going to have to decide this, but we've got enough opposition coming at us from outside the state to develop our resources, whether it's our oil, our gas, our timber, our fish, our minerals. So when we create our own division internally, that makes it all the more harder. So it's my words of advice.
Representative Sponholz.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you for your work on ensuring Alaska's strategic position is represented on renewable energy, and most importantly, I guess, thank you on behalf of my mother, myself, and my 3 daughters for ensuring that the Equal Rights Amendment has new life breathed into it. I was not born when it was originally introduced, and I like to think that another generation won't need to be born before it's addressed. But that's not what I wanted to ask you about. I'm a little choked up about that. I'm a little concerned that the census is underfunded. It's been estimated that in the 2010 census, Alaska was undercounted by about 8%. We know that that results in a reduction of our federal match for many programs. In light of our tight fiscal situation in Alaska, I think it's really important that we make sure we maximize our federal receipts and that Alaskans are fully accounted. What's being done to make sure that Alaskans are fully accounted?
Well, thank you for raising it. It is a key issue, and I don't care if your interest is healthcare or transportation or whatever it is. So much of what happens in this state is based on formula, and so much of that formula is based on the population count. And so you're absolutely accurate that we did not get the count that we had hoped. It's hard in this state, and I think we recognize that. In fairness, the U.S. Census recognizes that it is hard here as well, and they really have tried to work with us to give sufficient resources, but we are worried about where we are with the funding levels, and whether or not there will be sufficient outreach that is necessary to make sure that we have that fair count. Because if we're relying on people to participate or to engage through internet, we've got, we all know how we have challenges in different parts of our districts. So we are on this issue. We have Alaskans that are on that census board that are speaking up and addressing the concern. But at the end of the day, it's about resourcing it. It's about making sure that the Census Department has the resources so that they can bring on the personnel. Again, personnel is policy. And we don't want Alaskans to be disenfranchised in any way because we haven't been able to accurately count. So we will work with you all on that. That, again, years ago, Gary Stevens, how many years ago was it when I said, send those resolutions to us, because I had made some joke that when I was in the House, we would pass all these resolutions and we always wondered whether the delegation would just throw them in the garbage can. And then I got back there and I realized, no, these are really helpful. We submit these for the record to say this is where our state is. And so resolutions like that are good and important.
Senator Machicky.
Thank you, Madam President. Good morning.
Good morning.
Senator Murkowski, everything's larger in Alaska. Unfortunately, one of those things is the price per capita providing health care, Medicaid, if you will. Curious, with our geographic distance challenges, if there's any progress on a formulaic FMAP adjustment for sparsely populated states such as Alaska to try to meet our fiscal challenges.
We had a little bit of a conversation on that earlier, just Medicaid in general. I know clearly this is a cost driver that you all face, and one that we are very much in tune with. The issue of whether or not an FMAP adjustment is possible is something that we have been discussing. It is hard. It is hard because everybody all the states want to have an FMAP adjustment. They would all stand to gain. I think we can make the argument here in Alaska that we have one of the lowest ratios, and so we should be the ones to be able to see that adjustment. So that's something that is in the toolkit of things that we can look to as a possibility, but I don't want to stand here and suggest to you that that's going to be easy. I don't remember what year it was that Senator Stevens and I were working. It seems to me it was early on, maybe 04, 06, and we were able to get a slight FMAP adjustment. When I say slight, it was like a 2%, but it was as if, I don't know. I don't know what my example would be. It was dang hard work. So it is a possibility, but it's just hard. We know that that there are opportunities for us to look at Medicaid and the issues that we're dealing with that are increasing our costs. There are some things that I think we should be willing to explore. Alaska has been very innovative with what we have been able to do with some of the waivers that have been advanced in the past 5 years or so. And so we've kind of pioneered in some of these. I think we're going to have to keep pioneering in here. One thing that I will share with you that is a worry of mine, I know in the Anchorage area particularly, finding a provider who will accept a Medicare beneficiary, pretty hard. If you're bringing your parent to Alaska looking for a provider, it's pretty tough to find anyone who will take a Medicare recipient, and that's tied to the reimbursement that we have here. It's a low reimbursement. Our Medicaid reimbursement is a more favorable reimbursement, and that's why it's easier for providers to say, yeah, I'm going to take Medicaid. It would be a pretty tough scenario around this state if providers were to say, I can't do Medicare and I can't do Medicaid. So again, very, very challenging issues that you have in front of us, but know that we've got teams working with the administration folks back in Washington, D.C. at CMS who have been willing to really think innovatively on some of the solutions, because they see the dilemma that we face up here.
We have time for 2 more questions. That'll be Representative Wool, and batting cleanup will be Senator Begich. Representative Wool.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Senator Murkowski, for coming here and for taking our questions. Climate change, as you know, is a hot topic, pardon the pun, and people ask me sometimes what us as Alaskans, a big state with 700,000 people, can do about it, and my answer of late has been, if we can help get the 1.4 billion people in China, for example, to burn our natural gas, I think that would be helpful in that area, and it would also help our state, giving us a source of low-cost energy for Alaskans, especially rural Alaskans, and much needed jobs. Is there any words of encouragement you can give us from your end, from the federal level, to help us facilitate this project that we all want badly?
Well, we've been talking about ways to get our gas out of the ground into others for a long, long time. And I think we recognize that it is an asset that we have, and one when you want to talk about ways that you can impact a trade imbalance with a country like China, this is a great opportunity for Alaska, for jobs, and access to resource for us, but also to the nation as a whole. This is, as you know, more local to you in terms of the decisions and how that is structured. At the federal level, our role is to make sure that the project, the proposal, is able to move through our own regulatory process. So when I mentioned the need to ensure that we've got people in place to address the state's application, that is still moving forward. There's obviously change in administration. The Walker administration was very aggressive in moving this forward. And with a new administration, it doesn't mean that we put the brakes on what is happening with that application. FERC is still moving, and it is a very big initiative for them. It's the biggest application they've ever processed. And what I don't want to have happen is them look up at Alaska and say, well, I don't know, maybe they're not really interested in this. Maybe we should be moving our attention to these other pending applications that are sitting out here in the Gulf of Mexico and start moving on those. We want to keep ours in the queue. You basically are preserving your options, and that's what we should be doing. So we're going to keep pushing on that.
Senator Begich.
Thank you, Senator Giesel. And thank you, Senator Murkowski, for the work you do back in Washington, D.C., for all of us, joining everybody in that process. But my concern is around electoral integrity and the issue that recently the president withdrew some of his support for efforts to ensure that our election system won't be hacked and won't be affected. Our state was one of the states that was actually penetrated. We don't know the full details of that, but it was in fact hacked. Our system was. What efforts are there in Congress right now around electoral integrity that we can count on coming from you folks to help us with that process?
Well, this is something that it's not only been a series of hearings on both sides of the chamber in the House and in the Senate, focused on the security of our elections and really the vulnerability that we have to these hacks. What we have learned about the hacks that came from Russia very directly into our electoral system should be keeping all of us awake at night. This is not some casual interference or somebody who just happened to be poking around and gets lucky. This was very targeted, and it's not just been on the United States. It has been on other nations, as we know. So your question about what are we doing to provide for enhanced security, the Congress is working on legislation to address just this. It's more, though, than election security. I think it goes to the bigger issue of cybersecurity and what we are doing aggressively on the issue of cyber. In my view, we're not moving fast enough or quick enough or being nimble enough. We had a hearing in the Energy Committee last week, 2 weeks ago, on cybersecurity and the potential threat, the vulnerability to our energy infrastructure. You want to bring a community to its knees. You take out the power. You want to bring down a country. There's a huge vulnerability there for us, and what we know is that we have, in an effort to go after the bad guys, we say, okay, you've got to be able to demonstrate that you have put all of these protocols in place and kind of this check the box. Well, then everybody gets so focused on checking the box that they're not laying awake at night thinking, what are the bad guys doing to come in and disrupt us? Because they're just focused on the day job, which is checking the box. So we've got to get away from that model too, giving ourselves the flexibility. So we want to have the framework in place that puts the incentives out there, but does not bind us to something that's only going to allow us to go after yesterday's technologies and not what the bad guys are doing tomorrow. So it's electoral security, but it's also the broader issue of cybersecurity. In my view, we are not doing enough quick enough, and I think we see that every day.
Thank you, Senator Murkowski.
Thank you. All right. Thank you.
That was U.S. Senator Lisa Murkowski's 2019 address to the Alaska Legislature, live from the state capitol in Juneau. She recapped some recent legislative accomplishments in D.C. She celebrated regular order in the Senate and bipartisanship for getting a major but not necessarily headline-grabbing lands bill through the Senate with a 92-8 vote. Many impacts on Alaska. And she had a few pieces of advice. She said shutting down the government is no way to govern. She discouraged natural resource policymaking that creates divisions among Alaskans in response to lawmakers' question about part of Governor Michael Dunleavy's budget and legislative agenda. The governor has proposed essentially taking certain oil and gas property tax revenue away from municipalities in the state. We expect to hear from Alaska's junior senator, Dan Sullivan, at 11 a.m. Thursday. This special Gavel Alaska coverage was presented by KTOO Public Media in Juneau. I'm Jeremy Shea. Thanks for joining us.